going to tell you tonight about the power of a word. Now, you all know, as premium members, we talk a lot about how a single word, in fact, the email you get for this call, it talks about how a single word can be all it takes to win or lose. But however, when I see discussions on this in the Telegram group, I can see people guessing. Well, acceptance means this, or set off means that, and this means that, and then they write up their own definition. The problem with that is that when you're dealing with the law, you're dealing with very explicit things, and if you can use the correct definition and the source, and I call it don't be lazy, use the exact words that you find in the definitions, you'll find that the answers to so many things are right there in the definition. And in our advanced equity class, each week we go through many of these and talk about it in detail. And you'll see that many times the answers to many problems are right in the definitions. But see, since we don't bother looking it up, we just think we understand what it means. So the fact is, you don't know what it means. You don't even know what it means when somebody else is using it. Which dictionary are they using? Do you know? But if we're at least talking about law, we can say, well, Black's Law is definitely something we can rely upon. At least we can say, we are relying upon this definition. Now they may say, well, that's not the definition we're using. I said, okay, show me which definition you're using. And often they won't do it. So that's very unfair, but that's law. It's a wordplay. And so we have to be clear about which definition we're using when we use a word. We don't just go in there saying, I've got a right to this and I've got a right to that, and I glow in the dark and I'm a sovereign and I stand on the clouds and blah, 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 because somewhere I read on the internet that I'm a man. Whatever. I mean, I'm just saying, so can you explain it to a 6-year-old using definitions so that there's no doubt about what you're saying? And quite often, people just jump to an assumption rather than a definition. So, for example, in many times when we are, little typo there, when we're doing these things, we want to be very precise in the words. We don't use an extra word here and there. We don't use more than we need. We don't add words. And that's for politicians to make up words. We're talking about things that have specific meaning. For example, when we talk about when you're presented with a ticket or a summons or a collection thing, or a child support letter, or an indictment, they're all the same thing. They're all bills. And you don't think an indictment's a bill? Go look at one. It's called a true bill. Read it to the very end, and it'll say this is a true bill. They're using monetary and specific words that have specific meaning. What our brain is trained to do is get emotional and deny and deny and deny. Now, there's the room sometimes for the initial denial, just to say no offer. I disagree with the offer to contract. I do not consent to offer to contract, that kind of thing initially. But do you really know what you're saying when you say that? Why can you do that? Where does it say you can do that? If you have never looked it up, don't do it, because you're just guessing. Somebody on the internet told you to. I'm telling you, anything you're going to do, be sure you know the why before you try. Know the why before you try, and that means know the definitions too. So, for example, here's a couple of words we recently studied. And they're just a couple of many that we study in the advanced classes. But, for example, accept. We've heard us talk about you need to accept. You need to be a creditor. You need to, sometimes you've heard the term accepted for value. Well, that's not what this is, because guess what? Accepted for value is not in the dictionary. It's a made-up term. Don't use it if you don't know what it means, okay? That's really important. Don't use terms just because you heard it somewhere or you think that it means something. I'm going to go into court and say I'm a man. Okay, well, why would you do that? Why? Sometimes you might want to actually cite a name. There's reasons for it under certain circumstances. See, we want you to be knowledgeable, not just guessing. So let's look at this term. This would be out of Black's Law. You can get this in 4th or 5th edition. It's going to look very similar to this. Accept. To receive with approval or satisfaction. Now, by the way, let me just jump ahead one quick thing first. Typically, when we say you need to accept, people think they're saying accept responsibility. But do you see the word responsibility up here on screen? No, because that means something else. And it doesn't mean I'm saying I'm guilty. It's not saying I've done the deed. You might have done it, but what they're offering you is an offer to establish an agreement and settle it. But what you're doing is fighting them. And when you fight them, guess what? You're the one in dishonor, and you're the one that gets treated like what? A defendant/debtor. And we voluntarily step into it every time. However, when we do just the opposite, we do what the Bible says, which is to accept. Just like you're supposed to accept Jesus as your Savior, well, guess what? We're supposed to accept also the accusation and let somebody else handle it. That's what you're supposed to do as a Christian, essentially. Turn it over. Have so much faith that you can turn it over to someone else. I know this sounds like a spiritual, churchy thing, and it's not. I don't like it from a churchy standpoint. I like it from a practical standpoint. So that's why these definitions really, really matter, because they come directly from these things. So, for example, accept, to receive with approval or satisfaction. Don't we want to satisfy the matter rather than fight it? To receive with intent to retain. What are we receiving? We're receiving something of value. They gave you a document. That document has value. It can be turned into a contract and converted to settle the matter. But we don't look at it that way. You have to change your mind. You have to free your mind if you want to be free. Matrix says, free your mind. Admit and agree to, accede to or consent to. You're consenting to them to do something. Receive with approval, to adopt, to agree to. Okay, what are you agreeing to? So anyway, let's skip past the references. Means something more than to receive, meaning to adopt, to agree to carry out provisions, to keep and retain. The capacity of a drawee of a bill means to recognize the draft and engage to pay it when due. Now let's look at that last sentence really, really carefully. Slow down. In the capacity of a drawee of a bill, when they hand you a true bill, who's the drawer of the bill? The prosecutor is. When they hand you a ticket, who's the drawer of the bill? The police officer. When they hand you a bill for your taxes, who's the drawer of the bill? The IRS or whoever. Who's the drawee then? Well, that must be the person receiving it, the one receiving, the drawee. And we recognize it as a draft. Instead of recognizing it as a bill, it's actually a draft of the money to settle the account. And then we must engage to pay it when due. Now, what do we can look up the word pay and other words that are here. What I'm getting at is this. It's a draft, it's a bill, and you're engaging to get it paid when due. And you're appointing the third party, essentially, which is the court, and the person who brought it to you, to take it back and settle it. They just want your acceptance of it. By accepting it, endorsing it, giving it back. That's generally very much what we're doing. Now, there is a notice required. You got to tell them you know what you're doing. You got to show them you know what you're doing. That's a whole other thing we get into in the other training. But I just want you to understand the simplicity of this. The money is right on the bill. You need to execute a transaction, not deny it necessarily. And then there's the word acceptance. Notice it has a different definition. We could have just assumed it means the same thing. Taking and receiving of anything in good part, and as it were a tacit agreement to a preceding act. So in other words, they've given this to you, and it's an agreement to an act that they gave this to you to do something. You direct them to, by accepting it, to give it back and settle it. Okay? And it would have been, they could go ahead and really hammer you, Let's keep reading. What might have been defeated or avoided if such acceptance had not been made. So be careful how you behave. And you can have the greatest documents in the world, and they're helpful sometimes on the record, but your actions matter too. The act of a person to whom a thing is offered or tendered by another. We do an acceptance. So that's the action. That's the verb. And then we give it back to confer them power to act. The exercise of power conferred by an offer of performance of some act. So you see, this is the nature in which acceptance can work. Again, that's just the deeper thing we try to get into in this equity studies that we're doing. But in a general sense, you can understand this. If you just look at it that way, why acceptance is so powerful. You're seeing everything through the eyes of this contract world, this equity exchange world, okay? And so just don't make up words. These words have meaning, and they can carry a lot of weight when they understand that you understand them, the way you understand them, and then the way you act. Exercise of power conferred by an offer of performance of some act. You see, you can have the greatest documents in the world, but if you don't act accordingly, what good is it? So, and we also sometimes talk about conditional acceptance. Conditional acceptance is not an acceptance. The conditional means, obviously, it means you've added a condition to it. So you're saying, I'll do that if I will accept that upon proof of claim of that. Or whatever it is. You put a condition in that tells them to perform temporarily so that you can come to an acceptance. Oftentimes people don't want to do an acceptance, they want to try a conditional acceptance. But remember, the only reason you ever use a conditional acceptance is to lead to an acceptance. You want an agreement to get the heck out of there, don't you? Or do you want to fight them and try to make a point? Most people are doing that, and guess what? Jesus didn't say, he said, turn the other cheek. Take it and turn the other cheek. He didn't say, tell them you can't do that to me. Nah, 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 nah. I'm telling you, these little things matter and they work. They don't expect you to know how to act like a grown-up that knows how to read this stuff. And the problem is we're trained to act like children when we deal with the law. You know, we start accusing and fighting and arguing. I suggest you try to avoid that. Try to come to peace, because the one who comes to peace is the one that's in control. Don't you want to be in control? What was the purpose of the Matrix? Control. But why did Neo try so much to learn how to fight? It wasn't until he learned that he didn't have to fight that he could get it resolved, and then he did. He came to an agreement at the end. He accepted it, but by him accepting, he took all the power. He was in control. So that's what this is about. You want to fight, that's fine. You want to be emotional and have a tantrum, that's fine. You want to fight the law because they're all corrupt, blah, 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 blah. They might be, but maybe they're also trying to teach you a lesson. Look at it that way for a minute, and your approach might change significantly.